The twin suns of Ashara Prime painted the endless dunes in shades of copper and gold. But Serafina Vex saw none of the beauty as her starfighter screamed through the atmosphere, trailing smoke like a dying comet. Warning klaxons shrieked in her ears, and the acrid smell of burning circuitry filled her lungs. No, 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 she hissed through clenched teeth, her violet fingers dancing across the failing control panel. The sabotage had been subtle. Clever whoever had tampered with her ship had known exactly where to strike. Her experimental armor, the Nexus Weave, had already activated in emergency mode, its liquid silver surface rippling across her lithe form like living mercury. But even its advanced systems couldn't compensate for a ship in free fall. The desert rushed up to meet her with terrifying speed. Serafina braced herself, channeling every ounce of her training into staying conscious. The impact was brutal. Metal shrieked and tore as the fighter carved a canyon through the sand, tumbling end over end. Her armor absorbed the worst of it, but even its adaptive matrix had limits. With a final sickening crunch, the wreckage settled into an unnatural silence. Seraphine's head lolled against the shattered canopy. Through blurred vision, she saw the Nexus Weave flickering, its once seamless surface fracturing into thousands of gleaming fragments. Horror pierced through her pain as she watched her armor, the prototype that represented 5 years of her life's work, disintegrate around her like glass in a hurricane. The pieces scattered across the sand, each fragment pulsing with a faint inner light before going dark. She tried to move and immediately regretted it. Her ribs protested with sharp, stabbing pain. Blood, deep indigo in color, trickled from a gash above her left eye. But worse than any physical injury was the knowledge that without her armor, she was stranded on one of the most hostile planets in the sector. The whine of approaching engines cut through her dazed thoughts. Seraphine's blood turned to ice. She knew those sounds. Black Star Syndicate gunships. The same mercenaries who'd likely sabotaged her fighter in the first place. They'd been hunting her for weeks, desperate to prevent her testimony about their war crimes from reaching the High Council. With the last reserves of her strength, Serafina dragged herself from the wreckage. Every movement was agony, but terror drove her forward. She half crawled, half stumbled to a nearby dune, and burrowed into the sand, using it as meager cover. The heat was unbearable, the grains working their way into her wounds. But discovery would mean death or worse, capture. The gunships touched down with mechanical precision. Through her sandy veil, Serafina could see boots hitting the ground, hear the sharp orders being barked. They were methodical, professional. They'd find her soon enough. Her consciousness wavered. The blood loss, the heat, the trauma, it was too much. As darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, Seraphine's last thought was a bitter one. She'd survived battles against impossible odds, only to die alone in the sand. Tobias, Mercer wiped the perpetual sheen of sweat from his weathered face and squinted at the horizon through the cracked visor of his salvage goggles. 42 years old, with more scars than credits to his name, Toby had learned to read the desert like other men read books. That column of smoke in the distance? Fresh wreckage. And fresh wreckage meant opportunity. His sand skimmer hummed beneath him, a patchwork of salvaged parts, held together by pure stubbornness and recycled prayer. It had been 3 weeks since his last decent find, and the fuel cells were running dangerously low. He needed this score. As he approached the crash site, however, his practiced eye caught details that made his stomach sink. Military-grade hull plating, exotic alloys he couldn't even name, and circling overhead like vultures in vacuum-sealed armor, Black Star Syndicate gunships. Damn, Toby muttered, his hand instinctively moving to the plasma cutter at his hip. He should leave. Nothing good ever came from tangling with the Syndicate. But curiosity, that old, familiar devil, had its hooks in him now. He killed the skimmer's engine and crept closer on foot, using the wreckage for cover. The syndicate mercenaries were focused on the main crash site, searching with a kind of intensity that spoke of personal stakes. Whatever they were looking for, it was valuable. That's when he saw her. Half buried in the sand like some kind of exotic treasure, a woman lay motionless. But she was no ordinary woman. Her skin was a deep, luminous purple that seemed to shimmer even beneath the coating of sand and blood. She was clearly alien, though her form was remarkably humanoid, tall and lean, with elegant features that would have been beautiful if not for the obvious injuries marring them. Scattered around her were fragments of what looked like advanced armor, each piece gleaming with an inner luminescence that made Toby's salvager instincts sing. That technology alone could set him up for life. He should walk away, should pretend he'd never seen her. But Toby had been alone in the wastes for 5 years, ever since the mining accident that killed his crew and destroyed his reputation. 5 years of solitude did things to a man's soul, hollowed it out, made it echo with might-have-beens and should-have-dones. He'd saved exactly no one in that accident, paralyzed by fear and shock until it was too late. Maybe that's why he found himself sliding down the dune toward her, even as his rational mind screamed at him to flee. "Come on." "Purple," he whispered, checking for a pulse. To his relief, he found one faint and thready, but present. Her skin was fever-hot beneath his calloused fingers, and up close he could see the intricate patterns that seemed to flow beneath her dermis like living art. Her eyes snapped open, brilliant silver irises that seemed to glow from within. In a movement almost too fast to follow, her hand shot out and seized his wrist with surprising strength. Despite her weakened state, her grip was iron. "Touch the armor fragments," she rasped in accented but clear standard, "and I'll snap every bone in your hand." Toby blinked. Then, despite everything, the danger, the absurdity of the situation, the sheer insanity of what he was doing, he felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep in his chest. "Well, hello to you too, sunshine. You always this friendly to people trying to save your life?" Her silver eyes narrowed with suspicion and pain. "I don't need saving, especially not from a human scavenger." "Really?" Toby glanced pointedly at the syndicate ships, then at her obvious injuries. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've got maybe 10 minutes before those bastards finish their sweep and find you. And something tells me they're not the welcome wagon." Seraphine's jaw clenched, and he could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Pride versus pragmatism, independence versus survival. Finally, with obvious reluctance, she released his wrist. "The armor comes with me," she said, her voice brooking no argument. "Every fragment, non-negotiable." Toby looked at the scattered pieces, then at the approaching mercenaries, then back at this stubborn, wounded alien woman who was already trying to sit up despite her obvious injuries. "Lady, that fancy tech of yours is scattered across 50 meters of sand, and we've got about 8 minutes before company arrives. But sure, we'll play pickup sticks on the way out. Now can we please—" "I'm Seraphina," she interrupted, then winced as the movement pulled at her ribs. "Not lady, or sunshine, or purple. Seraphina Vex." "Toby Mercer," he replied, already scooping up the nearest armor fragments and shoving them into his salvage bag. "And we can exchange life stories later if we survive the next hour. Deal?" Despite her pain, despite her situation, Seraphina felt a ghost of a smile tug at her lips. This human was either incredibly brave or monumentally stupid. Possibly both. Deal. Together, working with desperate speed, they gathered what fragments they could reach. Seraphina tried to help, but her injuries made movement difficult. In the end, Toby had to support most of her weight as they stumbled toward his sand skimmer, the precious cargo of armor pieces clutched between them. As they crested the dune, Toby cast one last look at the crash site, at all the valuable salvage he was leaving behind. Years of poverty and scraping by, all represented in that scattered treasure. But then he felt Seraphine's weight against him, heard her labored breathing, and found he didn't regret the choice. Not even a little. The sand skimmer's engine coughed to life, and they shot across the dunes just as shouts of alarm rose from the crash site. Toby pushed the aging vehicle for everything it had, and by some miracle, it held together. Behind them, the Syndicate gunships began to lift off, but the desert was vast and full of places to hide for those who knew its secrets. Toby knew them all. As the adrenaline began to fade, Seraphina slumped against him, her head lolling onto his shoulder. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, she registered the warmth of him, the surprising gentleness in his calloused hands, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Why?" she murmured, barely conscious. "Why help me?" Toby was quiet for a long moment, guiding the skimmer through a narrow canyon that would break their pursuer's line of sight. When he finally answered, his voice was soft, almost lost beneath the wind. "Because I'm tired of walking away. And because sometimes you get one chance to do something that matters." Seraphina wanted to respond, to tell him that helping her was likely a death sentence, that the Syndicate never gave up, that he'd just thrown his life away for a stranger. But darkness was pulling at her, irresistible and complete. Her last conscious thought was that his shoulder made a surprisingly comfortable pillow. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Seraphina Vex fell asleep feeling safe. Seraphina woke to the sound of wind howling through metal gaps and the acrid smell of rust mixed with ozone. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was back on her ship, that the crash had been just another nightmare. Then pain lanced through her ribs, sharp and immediate, and reality crashed back with brutal clarity. Her eyes opened to dim light filtering through holes in a corrugated metal ceiling. She was lying on something that might generously be called a cot more accurately. It was a piece of foam padding on a salvaged cargo platform. But it was surprisingly clean, and someone had placed a thin thermal blanket over her. "Easy there," came a voice from across the makeshift shelter. "You've been out for almost a full day cycle." Seraphina turned her head carefully, because everything hurt to find Toby hunched over a workbench, cobbled together from scrap metal and hope. Spread before him like the dissected remains of some mechanical creature were the fragments of her Nexus weave armor. He was examining one piece through a magnification visor, his weathered hand surprisingly gentle as he turned it in the light. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The world tilted dangerously. Whoa, hold on. Toby was beside her in an instant, his hand on her shoulder steadying, not restraining. "You've got at least 2 cracked ribs, a concussion, and about a dozen lacerations that needed sealing. I did what I could with field Midgel, but you need to take it slow. My armor," Seraphina started, trying to see past him, "is all accounted for. Every piece we could salvage." He gestured to the workbench. 63 fragments in total. Some are in better shape than others, but I haven't touched anything except to catalog and clean them. Figured you'd want to supervise before I started poking around. Seraphina felt an unexpected swell of relief. She'd half expected to wake up and find him gone with her life's work, or worse, to have attempted repairs and damaged the delicate systems beyond recovery. Instead, he'd shown remarkable restraint. "You didn't try to activate any of the components?" she asked, searching his face for deception. Toby shook his head. "I'm a salvager, not an idiot. That tech is way beyond my pay grade. I know enough to recognize when something is dangerous to mess with." He paused, then added with a wry smile, "Plus, you did threaten to break all my bones. Figured I should at least wait until you could follow through on that before I risked annoying you." Despite herself, despite the pain and the dire circumstances, Seraphina felt her lips twitch. Wise decision? I have my moments. Toby returned to the workbench, but his posture was more relaxed now. "So, You want to tell me what makes this armor so special that the Black Star Syndicate is willing to glass half the desert to find you? Serafina was silent for a long moment, weighing how much to reveal. Trust didn't come easily to her. Years in the Celestial Guard had taught her that information was often more valuable than weapons. But this human had risked his life to save hers, and had shown unexpected honor regarding her most precious possession. "It's called the Nexus Weave," she said finally, pushing herself into a sitting position, despite the protest from her ribs. "A fusion of adaptive biotechnology and smart metal alloys. The armor is designed to interface directly with my neural patterns, essentially becoming an extension of my body. It can reshape itself to counter threats, redistribute mass for speed or protection, even heal minor damage to itself and its wearer." Toby let out a low whistle. "That's incredible and terrifying." He picked up one of the larger fragments, holding it up to the light. Even dormant, the metal seemed to shimmer with potential. "So why is it in a million pieces?" "The neural interface makes it powerful but unstable," Serafina admitted, the words tasting like failure. "The armor is constantly reading my biological signals, adapting to my emotional state, my physical condition. During the crash, when I was—" She paused, unwilling to admit how terrified she'd been. "The trauma feedback caused a cascade failure. The armor literally tore itself apart, trying to protect me from conflicting imperatives." "Trying to be everything at once," Toby murmured, still studying the fragment. "And ended up being nothing." The observation was more perceptive than Serafina had expected. She looked at him with renewed interest, really looked at him for the first time. Toby Mercer was human, probably middle-aged by their standards, with sun-weathered skin and the kind of scars that spoke of a hard life. His hair was a sandy brown shot through with premature gray, and his eyes were a startling hazel that seemed to see more than he let on. There was a loneliness about him, a weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. "Can it be fixed?" he asked, breaking her from her examination. "I don't know," Serafina answered honestly. "Under normal circumstances, with a proper lab and the right equipment, yes. But here?" She gestured at their surroundings, the rusted mining rig that served as shelter, the makeshift tools, the endless desert beyond. "It seems impossible." Toby set down the fragment and turned to face her fully. "You know what I've learned in 20 years of salvaging? Impossible just means nobody's figured out how yet." He moved to a battered storage locker and pulled out a datapad covered in scratches and burns. "I've been mapping the waste since I got stranded here. There are wrecks out there from a dozen different civilizations, mining operations, military outposts, research stations. If the components exist to fix your armor, I can find them. And if they don't, then we improvise." His grin was crooked but genuine. "I'm real good at improvising." Serafina wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in that easy confidence. But years of disappointment and betrayal made hope feel dangerous. "Why are you doing this? You could have sold those fragments to any number of buyers. The black market alone would pay enough to get you off this planet and set you up for life." Toby was quiet for a moment, his expression growing distant. When he spoke, his voice carried old pain. 5 years ago, I was part of a mining crew. 32 people. We hit a pocket of unstable gas, and the whole rig started coming apart. He rubbed absently at a scar on his forearm. "I was near an escape pod. Could have saved myself, maybe grabbed 1 or 2 others. Instead, I froze. Just stood there while everything collapsed. While people screamed for help, I didn't give. The silence that followed was heavy with ghosts. By the time I snapped out of it, there were only escape pods enough for the crew that had made it to the launch bay on their own. 15 of us got out. 17 didn't." His eyes met hers, and she saw the guilt he carried like chains. "I've been living with that for 5 years. Every day, I wonder if I could have made a difference. If I'd been braver, faster, better. Serafina understood then. She'd seen it before in soldiers who'd survived when their units hadn't survivor's guilt. The desperate need for redemption. You can't change the past by helping me. No, Toby agreed. But maybe I can change who I am going forward. Maybe I can be the person who doesn't freeze when someone needs help. He shrugged, almost embarrassed by the admission. Or maybe I'm just a lonely old fool who's tired of talking to himself. The vulnerability in that statement cracked something in Seraphine's carefully maintained walls. She'd been alone too, in her own way. Surrounded by fellow soldiers, but always separate. Always the brilliant engineer who others respected but never quite connected with. Her entire focus had been on her work, on the armor that would revolutionize combat and save countless lives. But here in this rusted shelter, injured and stranded, she felt a connection she hadn't anticipated. My people have a saying, she said softly. Strength alone breaks, but strength shared endures. She met his eyes. If you're willing to help me repair the Nexus Weave, I'm willing to teach you how it works, properly. No secrets. Toby's eyebrows rose. You'd share classified military technology with a human salvager? I'd share it with the man who saved my life, Serafina corrected. There's a difference. A slow smile spread across Toby's face, transforming it from weathered to warm. Well then, partner, let's get started. The next several days fell into a rhythm. Mornings were spent scavenging in the nearby wrecks, searching for components that might work with the Nexus Weave's exotic systems. Toby proved to be an invaluable guide, navigating the treacherous wastes with practiced ease and an almost supernatural ability to find exactly what they needed. There, he said one afternoon, pointing to a half-buried research module. See those markings? That's Talarian Science Division. They worked with adaptive materials. Might have something we can use. Serafina, still moving carefully due to her healing ribs, followed him into the wreck. The interior was a tomb of failed ambitions, shattered equipment, scattered datapads, the skeletal remains of furniture. But Toby moved through it like he was reading a story, touching things with a reverent curiosity. You really love this, don't you? She observed. The salvaging. It's like archaeology, Toby said, prying open a storage compartment. Every wreck is a snapshot of lives lived, dreams pursued. These people came here looking for something: wealth, knowledge, escape. They left pieces of themselves behind. He pulled out a processing core, examining it critically. I like thinking I'm giving their stuff new purpose. Seems respectful somehow. Serafina had never considered salvaging in such philosophical terms. To her, it had always seemed like picking over corpses. But Toby's perspective was different. He saw continuity, legacy, the opportunity to honor what came before by building something new from it. This'll work, he announced, holding up the core. The resonance frequency is all wrong, but we can recalibrate it. Back at their shelter, afternoons were dedicated to the delicate work of repair. Serafina would explain the theory, while Toby's surprisingly deft hands would execute the practical work. He had a natural intuition for how systems fit together, often anticipating solutions before she finished explaining the problem. You would have made an excellent engineer, she told him one evening as they worked by the light of a salvaged luminator. Toby snorted. Never had the formal training. Everything I know, I learned from necessity and trial and error. Lots of error. The best kind of education, Serafina countered. She was positioning 2 armor fragments while he prepared the neural bonding matrix. Theory is worthless without practical application. Half the engineers in the Guard couldn't change a power cell without a manual. But you could, Toby said, not making it a question. I built my first plasma regulator when I was 9 cycles old, Serafina admitted. My broodmother was furious. Said I should focus on more appropriate pursuits. The memory made her smile. I rebuilt it 3 times before she gave up trying to stop me. Sounds like you are a handful. I preferred determined. Toby laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Serafina realized she was hearing it more often now, that initially they'd worked in near silence, but gradually conversation had become as natural as breathing. They talked about everything her life in the Guard, his years in the wastes, the peculiarities of different alien species, the best ways to prepare ration packs. Toby's opinion: there are no best ways. They're all terrible. It was during these conversations that Serafina began to notice small things about him. The way his hands moved with unconscious grace when he worked. The crinkles around his eyes when he smiled. The surprising gentleness with which he handled the armor fragments, as if they were precious not because of their value, but because they were important to her. One evening, as a particularly vicious windstorm howled outside their shelter, they huddled close to the illuminator for warmth. The temperature in the wastes dropped dramatically after dark, and their salvaged heating unit could only do so much. "Tell me about your world," Toby said, his shoulder pressed against hers in the small space. "What's it like?" Serafina was quiet for a moment, remembering. "Xylera Prime is beautiful," she said finally. 3 moons that dance across the sky in harmony. Bioluminescent forests that glow like captured starlight. The architecture there is grown, not built living structures that breathe and adapt to their inhabitants. Sounds amazing. You miss it? I miss what it represents, Serafina said carefully. Home, belonging, but I've been away more than I've been there. The Guard is my real home now. Or it was. A shadow crossed her face. I don't know if I'll ever get back. The Syndicate won't stop hunting me, and without the armor, I'm just another fugitive with nowhere to run. Toby was silent, but she felt him shift closer. The gesture was protective, without being possessive, comforting without being patronizing. What about you? She asked, deflecting from her own melancholy. Where did you come from before the wastes? Earth colony in the Helix sector, Toby said. Nothing special. Did some military service when I was young and stupid, then got into civilian mining. Thought I'd make my fortune, retire early, maybe find someone to share it with. He laughed without humor. None of that worked out quite how I planned. No one waiting for you back home? Nah. My parents passed when I was in service, and I never was much good at the relationship thing. Work always came first. He glanced at her. Guess we have that in common. Serafina nodded slowly. They did have that in common. Both of them had chosen duty over connection, ambition over intimacy. Both had ended up alone, defined by their work rather than their relationships. Do you regret it? She asked quietly. Toby considered the question seriously. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind sounds almost like voices, I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd made different choices. If I'd stayed home, married that girl from the colony, had kids. He shrugged. But then I think, would I even be the same person? The choices we make, even the bad ones, they shape us. Maybe I needed to end up here, like this, to become someone who would pull a stubborn alien warrior out of the sand instead of walking away. I wasn't that stubborn, Serafina protested, but there was a smile in her voice. You threatened to break my hands within 30 seconds of meeting me. I stand by that threat. Their laughter mingled in the small space. And for a moment, the storm outside and the danger pursuing them seemed very far away. In this cocoon of warmth and shared understanding, Serafina felt something shift inside her, a wall crumbling, a defense lowering. She turned to look at Toby and found him already looking at her. In the soft light of the illuminator, his hazel eyes seemed to hold entire worlds. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, and the shelter's emergency sensor began to beep proximity alert. They sprang apart, the spell broken by harsh reality. Toby moved to the sensor panel, his expression grim. Syndicate patrol. 3 clicks out and closing. He began grabbing essential supplies with practiced efficiency. We need to move, now. Seraphine's heart sank as she looked at the partially repaired armor spread across the workbench. They'd made significant progress, but it was nowhere near functional. Abandoning it now would mean starting over if they even survived to get another chance. We can't leave it, she said firmly. Sarafina, we don't have time. Then we make time. She was already carefully packing the fragments into their transport case. Her movements quick, despite her still healing injuries. 5 minutes. That's all I need. Toby wanted to argue. She could see it in his face. But instead, he nodded and began helping her pack. They worked in synchronized silence, hands moving in practiced coordination, each anticipating the other's needs. 4 minutes and 30 seconds later, they were racing across the dunes in Toby's sand skimmer, the case of armor fragments secured between them. Behind them, searchlights cut through the darkness like accusatory fingers. They're persistent. I'll give them that, Toby muttered, coaxing more speed from the aging vehicle. They can't afford not to be, Serafina replied grimly. I witnessed their massacre of the civilian station at Kepler's Gate. 6,000 innocents dead because they wanted to send a message. If I reach the High Council with that testimony, the Syndicate loses their government contracts, their legitimacy. They'll be hunted across every sector. So they're hunting you first. Toby took a sharp turn around a jutting rock formation, the skimmer's repulsors screaming in protest. How do you even survive to become such a problem for them? Luck, skill, stubbornness. Serafina braced herself as they hit a rough patch. I was supposed to be on that station, but my ship had mechanical issues. By the time I got there, her voice trailed off, the memory still raw. There were survivors in the lower levels. The Syndicate was executing them methodically. I managed to get recordings, save 37 people. But they know I saw everything. 37, Toby repeated softly. Then, more firmly, 37 people alive because you didn't freeze. Because you did something. The parallel to his own story wasn't lost on either of them. They drove through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and their pursuers. Eventually, as the first sun began to rise, Toby guided them into a narrow canyon that twisted like a serpent through ancient rock formations. Where are we going? Serafina asked. Somewhere they won't think to look, Toby said mysteriously. The canyon opened into a hidden valley, and Serafina caught her breath. Someone had built a garden here in the heart of the wastes, or rather salvaged one. Dome structures created microclimates where actual plants grew, fed by a combination of moisture condensers and what looked like a small aquifer. It was a tiny oasis of green in an ocean of sand and rust. I found this place 3 years ago, Toby explained as he parked the skimmer. Old terraforming experiment that got abandoned. The systems still work, and it's off every map I've ever seen. I come here sometimes when I need to remember what living things look like. They unloaded their precious cargo into one of the intact domes. Inside, the air was humid and rich with the scent of growing things. Serafina touched a vine heavy with strange flowers, marveling at the determined life flourishing in such an unlikely place. It's beautiful, she breathed. Yeah, Toby agreed, but he wasn't looking at the plants. He was looking at her, at the wonder on her face, at the way the morning light filtering through the dome painted her violet, skin in shades of lavender and rose. Serafina turned and caught his gaze. This time, neither of them looked away. Toby, she started, unsure what she wanted to say. He closed the distance between them in 2 steps. His hand came up to cup her cheek, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly, "and I will." Instead of answering with words, Seraphina closed the final gap between them. The kiss was tentative at first, a question being asked and answered, then deeper, more certain, as if they were both discovering something they hadn't known they'd been seeking. Toby's arms wrapped around her carefully, mindful of her healing ribs, but the embrace was no less fierce for its gentleness. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Seraphina rested her forehead against his, her silver eyes searching his hazel ones. "This is complicated," she whispered. "Everything worth having usually is." Toby replied, "I'm being hunted by one of the most ruthless organizations in the galaxy. I'm stranded on a hostile planet with no way off. My life's work is scattered in pieces, and I don't even know if we can fix it." She paused. "And I'm not human. We're from different worlds in every sense. I know. It won't be easy." "I know that too." Toby smiled, that crooked, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "But here's what I've learned, Seraphina Vex. Nothing important ever is. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes it real." Seraphina kissed him again, softer this time, a promise rather than a question. When they broke apart, she was smiling too. "Then let's fix my armor," she said. "Together." "Together," Toby agreed. Outside, the suns climbed higher, burning away the night. Inside the dome, surrounded by life that refused to die despite impossible odds, two lonely souls found something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed: each other. And in that moment, with danger still circling and challenges still ahead, it felt like enough. It felt like everything